Hi everyone, and thanks for listening to this series of preparation sessions for the module SA4M8E Economic Evaluation, which will run in the second week of the teaching session in June. The purpose of these preparation sessions is to give you a very brief overview of the concepts and principles that you'll be covering in the module, and to allow you to attend the module in a more informed way and to engage with the material right from the start of the course. So there are 4 preparation sessions. The first one, which I'm recording at the moment, will talk about what an economic evaluation is, why you might be interested in conducting them, and the different types of economic evaluation that can be used. The second session will consider the different types of model that can be used to conduct an economic evaluation, the key ones being decision trees and Markov models. The third session will consider some of the inputs to economic evaluations and where you might find the information to do this. And the final session will consider how you interpret the results of an economic evaluation and how they can be used in decision making. So first of all, what is an economic evaluation? Well, this quote from the Drummond textbook, which is recommended for the course, that is Methods for the Economic Evaluation of Healthcare Programs, nicely sums up what can be considered an economic evaluation. So an economic evaluation is the comparative analysis of alternative courses of action in terms of both their costs and consequences. So we can take from this quote that it's the analysis of alternative courses of action, so that is 2 or more interventions, and it considers them in both their costs and their consequences. So this is how it differs from something which considers just an intervention's effectiveness. It also considers the costs that are associated with an intervention and with the benefits that this intervention might bring. And in doing so, it can help make value judgments about whether an intervention is worth investing in. At this stage, it is also worth considering what wouldn't be considered an economic evaluation. So sometimes you see studies that look at the burden of disease and the cost that this brings to different countries. And because this wasn't comparing alternative courses of action, this wouldn't be considered an economic evaluation. Similarly, you may see papers that look at the costs and consequences of a single course of action, and this also wouldn't be considered an economic evaluation. So it's about comparing 2 or more alternatives and looking at them in terms of both their costs and consequences. So why are we interested in economic evaluations, and why is this module included in the course? Well, it fits into the wider trend of looking at the increase in health expenditure across different countries and ways of reducing expenditure or constraining spending. So I'm sure that many of you will have seen graphs tracking the increase in health expenditure over time in different countries, and I tried to pick a figure which gives a different picture. So this is an analysis of Massachusetts state spending from 2004 to 2014. And over on the left side, you can see there has been a large increase in the healthcare spending that the state does. But over on the right-hand side, you can see that at the same time, there's been a decrease in most other areas that the state has responsibility for spending. So when people talk about the increases in health expenditure, this increase comes at a cost in other areas that government may want to spend money on. And indeed, some of these areas will be important for ensuring that populations attain high levels of health, as well as the healthcare services that help do this. So by considering both the costs and consequences of alternate courses of action, economic evaluations help to guide decisions on allocations of resources, and they help to guide which interventions to invest in by considering how much we value the benefits that they can bring and whether their improvements are acceptable given the costs that would be incurred in providing them. So alongside of this question of why we do economic evaluations, I want to talk about why we use modelling to do economic evaluations rather than running, for example, randomised control trials and tracking the costs of different groups. Well, when you use modelling, it allows a longer-term analysis of the costs and outcomes than experimental evidence would usually allow. So you can track the long-run costs and outcomes of an intervention in a way that an RCT wouldn't be able to. It wouldn't be feasible to use that type of evidence. So using modelling also allows synthesis of a range of available evidence. So you can take the results of meta-analyses and use these to plot treatment outcomes, and you can take costs from different sources. Modelling also allows analysis of interventions that may not have been trialled against each other. So you could take the results of multiple studies and track the longer term costs, even where there hasn't been a direct comparison between the interventions. So what are the different types of economic evaluation that we'll talk about in the module? Well, the first and perhaps the simplest is the cost effectiveness analysis. So this analysis looks at the costs associated with the intervention and the benefits that the intervention brings. And then it looks at outcomes in terms of physical or natural units. So these units could be something like life years gained in communicable disease. It could be infections averted. You could also use a more intermediate outcome like weight loss or control of blood pressure or another biological outcome. The other type that can be used is a cost utility analysis, and this extends on the cost effectiveness analysis by considering both the costs and the outcomes in terms of quantity but also quality of life. So there is a utility or value attached to the years that are lived, the life years that might be gained by an intervention. And we'll talk about quality of life and quality adjusted life years more in one of the later recorded sessions. It's worth mentioning that there are other approaches that can be used for economic evaluation. So where the effectiveness of different alternatives is the same, a cost minimization analysis might be used. Similarly, it's possible to convert outcomes to monetary terms, and if this analysis was used, it would be termed cost benefit. So these analyses, so the cost benefit analysis isn't used so much within healthcare, but it would be important to consider the gains that can be got across different sectors of government or spending. So those are two additional approaches, and I don't think they'll be covered much in the module. So the focus will be much more on cost effectiveness analysis and cost utility analysis. So just a word on this terminology. Often you'll see cost utility analysis referred to as cost effectiveness analysis, and this is something that it's generally okay to do. Obviously, because cost utility implies a value, you wouldn't call a cost effectiveness analysis a cost utility one. So at the end of this first session, I briefly wanted to cover the steps that are needed to undertake an economic evaluation, and we'll talk more about these steps in the next sessions, and this is something you'll focus on throughout the module in June. So first of all, as with anything, there needs to be a defining of the research question, so defining the population involved, the health area, the interventions you want to need. In the next session, I'll be talking about this much more, but you'll need to select a modelling structure. So this could be a decision tree or a Markov model. And then you'd need to identify the relevant costs and benefits or outcomes, and use the costs and benefits that you've identified to calculate the differences in alternatives, and to finally calculate an incremental cost effectiveness ratio, which is the central output of the economic evaluation. As with all research, there'll be some level of uncertainty around the results you get. So economic evaluations require tests for sensitivity so that you're able to communicate the uncertainty involved in the evaluation. And then there needs to be an interpretation of the results and to think about what the cost effectiveness ratio means in terms of how much society is willing to pay and whether an intervention can be adjudged to be valued. So that brings us to the end of the first recorded session, and in the next session we'll be talking about decision trees and Markov models.